Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar and our series of updates. Last week, we had an update on plastic recycling, and we're excited this week to provide an update on paper recycling. Again, we're glad that you joined. Next slide, please, Sharon. I want to say, first of all, the program is brought to you by the Wisconsin Printing Council. And the Wisconsin Printing Council was composed of a variety of associations and programs. First of all, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the Green Tier Program, which is a Wisconsin-specific program, the Association for Roll-to-Roll Converters, the Sustainable Green Printing Partnership, Flexographic Technical Association, the Great Lakes Graphics Association, Printing United Alliance, and TLMI. All together, we compose the Wisconsin Printing Council, and we're very excited to be hosting this webinar today. Next, please. I'm the moderator for today's program. My name is Gary Jones. I'm Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety Affairs for Printing United Alliance, and there's my email address in case you have some questions as a follow-up to today's webinar. Next. A couple things on logistics. First of all the attendees are muted. If you have a question or comment, please use the chat box to submit your question. We'll be answering questions at the end of the program. This webcast is being recorded, and the recording will be available to you along with a copy of the slides. And that information will follow in an email. Next. Today's agenda. Well, we got through welcomes and introductions. We're going to have a little bit of information, a review of the Sustainable Green Printing Partnership and the Green Tier Program on our next slide. We're going to talk, and Carl, who's our speaker for today, is going to talk about current trends in recovered paper markets, an overview of current recyclability test methods that he has been dedicating a lot of time to, and updating our efforts to simplify the testing for North America. Next, please. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny from the Wisconsin DNR, and she's going to walk us through the Green Tier and SGP programs.
Thanks, Gary. I just want to mention, we have these two programs available in Wisconsin, and it's easier for Wisconsin printers to demonstrate your company's commitment to becoming part of the environmental, social, and governance, ESG, and circular economies. You can do this by joining these two premier sustainability programs, the Wisconsin Green Tier Program and the Sustainable Green Printing Partnership, or SGP. Printers seeking local and national acknowledgement of their commitment to be a sustainable business can be certified by both Green Tier and SGP through a streamlined process. These organizations provide tools and resources to help printers improve their environmental footprint over time. These programs also have a common evaluation criteria, audits, and reports to make it easy for Wisconsin printers to gain more benefits for their sustainability efforts. Feel free to reach out to either organization for more information and details.
Thank you, Jenny. And I'm sorry I failed to mention her last name is Jenny Burkholz from the Wisconsin DNR. Jenny actually is one of the key staff members involved in the Green Tier program. And between these two programs, we work very closely with each other to make sure that they've aligned, and we make it a lot easier for, if you're in either one of the programs, to be able to easily be able to get into the other program. We encourage you to consider joining both the programs. Next, please. Okay, today's speaker, Dr. Carl Hauptmann. I've gotten to know Dr. Hauptmann over the past several years, working with him or get him really answering more questions for me than me answering questions for him on a couple of projects. And Carl was one of our speakers at our in-person program that we had last year. And he did a wonderful job of bringing us up to date on paper recycling and the work that he's doing. And actually, he's going to continue to reveal what he's doing in terms of the test methods. But just as a quick background, Dr. Hauptmann has a chemical engineering degree from the University of Minnesota, 2 degrees from University of Minnesota and the University of Delaware. Dr. Hauptmann joined the staff at the USDA Forest Products Laboratory in 1992. And since 1998, he has been directing research efforts on recycling of adhesive-containing papers, elucidating fungal decay mechanisms, and developing a viable biorefinery collection with a pulp and paper mill. So without further ado, Carl, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. And you can advance to the first slide, please. So Gary did a very nice introduction, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about the work that we've been doing. The first thing I'd like to address, and I think I recognize a few of the names, so I think there are a few folks that were actually at the presentation last year. And so I'm not going to go as in depth into the motivation of this work as I did last time. But a question that people often ask is, why does the Forest Service care about paper recycling? And part of it is related to the mission of the Forest Products Lab. I'm located in Madison, Wisconsin, and we are the national laboratory for the Forest Service. I'm actually a Forest Service employee. And the idea of paper recycling kind of loops into the idea of using forest resources in the most sustainable way possible. And that's why, and so I've been involved in paper recycling for quite a while. Can you go to the next slide, please? And I wanted to just give you an overview to just say that how paper recycling and then testing of whether something is recyclable, it really does depend on where you are in the world. The Europeans are a little bit ahead of us in the sense of developing regulations and developing methods for determining whether certifying if something is recyclable. And that's partially due to the fact that the EU has a fairly strong regulation arm. Give me just a second. I'm having a beep and it's related to a chat running. But then, as some of you know, and this is now a little bit older news, that back a little while ago, there was a big disruption in the North American and somewhat the European markets of recycling, in that China developed what they called the green sword, and they basically stopped taking practically any sort of material, recycling material. It had to have a very high quality to be able to be imported into China. And so we needed to shuffle things around, and it really did disrupt the market, but things have actually come back and stabilized a little bit. And then I would say that in North America, we really are certification driven. We really don't have what I would call a unified strategy here in terms of paper recycling in particular. Next slide, please. And I'm going to just use a couple of slides to talk about the motivation of this work. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. But one of the drivers of the kind of work that we're doing is related to material that's being recovered from residential sources. So, most American households have either curbside recycling or drop-off recycling. And all of that material ends up going to a material transfer facility. And part of the reason we're interested in that is that is a potentially very large fiber source, in that 50 to 60% by weight of material collected from residential sources is fiber. So advancing to the next slide. And those MRFs are located all over the country, material recovery facilities, or sometimes they're called MTF, material transfer facilities. Next slide.
Am I on the right slide, Dr. Hauptman?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a little bit, I'm being a little fast and loose with the comment here, but part of the problem that we're facing with all these material transfer facilities is that there's a large fraction of that fiber that's ending up in what is being called mixed paper, and that's there's an ESRI designation. And I just wanted to say, I know that there are several printers here, The material that you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen, is actually trimmer waste from a printing operation. And I sure hope that everyone who's a printer here and generating bales of this material, they're not sending it to a material transfer facility, but they're selling it directly to probably a waste paper handler and are probably able to get a pretty nice price for that. But stepping away though, one of the problems we face is that the material transfer facilities are generating a lot of this mixed paper. And in fact, something that people don't really realize is that in the age of Amazon and small boxes, in fact, a lot of what we call OCC or old corrugated cardboard is actually ending up in that mixed paper stream as well, because the boxes are small and usually OCC is separated on basis of size. So next slide. And here's, I wanted to just motivate a little further why we're interested in that mixed paper bale. Here's just ballpark numbers. That's actually 2020 numbers from the citation there is from a publication from the Recycling Partnership. And then I recently updated the numbers to 2023 prices. And the thing that is interesting is the price there is an apparent and average price over the country, over North America, or primarily the US. And the fact that mixed paper ends up at minus $5 a ton is it's an averaging of the fact that in some cases people are getting $40 or $50 a ton at the MRF for the mixed paper, but about 40% of the MRFs are actually having to pay tipping fees, and some of that and about 40% of that mixed paper is actually ending up in a landfill somewhere. So you end up with a negative number because some places are selling it, but some places are paying to have it removed. And so the motivation of the work and the idea of recyclability and recyclability testing is really kind of driven by improving the quality of that mixed paper will then make it more likely that people will be able to sell their mixed paper bales out of their material transfer facility. As an aside, notice the thing about glass containers there. As you get out in the 26, tipping fees are in the $40 to $50 a ton range. And so as you get out into the $26 negative for glass, you realize that a lot of glass these days is getting landfilled. And it's mostly due to the fact that it's mixed color, and there really isn't a good use for mixed colored glass. But that's a different subject. Go ahead and advance the next slide. So there's been a fair bit of effort on designing for fiber recycling. Next slide. And one of the major players, and as I said in the introduction, is, the Europeans are a little ahead of us in that they've been at this for about 10 years. And CEPI is an organization that you've probably heard of if you're dealing with recyclability at all. That's the Confederation of European Paper Industries. And Evergreen was one of their initiatives, and it's around the idea of designing fiber products. So this is both printed materials and packaging materials that are kind of set up for recycling. And CEPI actually has, and I'll come back to it in a minute, but CEPI has actually released a recyclability standard that is somewhat interesting. Next slide. And, folks are welcome to contact me afterwards. I can get you all of this documentation, but if you look up CEPI test method, you'll be able to find it. And I wanted to burrow into, I took this slide directly out of the annex to their test method. And I think it's useful to look at it and say, okay, what are they concerned about? And so if you look at it in the in the visual impurities stage, and they run on not pass fail, but they run on different levels. And you can see the kinds of things that they're really worried about. And so, for example, you can see that metallized particles under the CEPI test method, even a few particles are a problem for them. Whereas something like translucent particles, which might be like a little bit of polypropylene or something in there, they're less concerned about. And then, you know, the other kinds of typical particles that you've seen, you know, pigments and other fibers and things, they're less concerned about. It's just useful to be thinking about what is the, you know, when you are making choices about printing and designing, especially consumer packaging, but also other printed materials, what makes them get kicked out of the process or have a poor score? And these are some of the examples here. Next slide, please. And as I was saying before in the introduction, you know, there is no real unified effort, but there have been a lot of players in this. ISRI, obviously, Fiber Box Association, TAPI, TLMI, Green Blue is a non-governmental organization, AF&PA. So there's various players in this thing. And so that's why we're working towards developing a consensus standard. So go to the next slide, please. But before we get there, here are some kind of just general guidelines about how to make your materials more likely to be recycled. So you want to maximize fiber content. Thin coatings and things like that usually do not cause problems. So, you know, some sort of a potentially even a titanium or inorganic carrying acrylic coating, things like that generally don't cause problems for paper recycling. Tapes really aren't a problem. But you do want to try and avoid multi-material constructions, foils and films, minimizing wet strength agents. You know, I realize that most printing materials don't have wet strength, but a lot of packaging does. And then barrier films can sometimes cause problems. So these are just general guidelines to improve the likelihood that your material will be recycled, your fiber containing material. Next slide. But how do we know? Next slide. And I'm going to just diverge just slightly here in that, you know, it is kind of a whole picture question. For example, I mentioned at the beginning that the movement to having a bunch of small boxes from Amazon is actually having a problem, you know, causing a problem in the sortation circle, you know, making sure that the materials are moving through the material transfer facility correctly. But what we're working on really is the reprocessing piece. That's the technical recyclability. And then next slide. This is where how to recycle and the labeling. You know, you really, most North America, or a lot of North American companies are moving towards using this labeling program. So becoming a subscriber of how to recycle. Next slide. And then, so what do we need in the test method? Adhesives, yield, and then other contaminants. Next slide. And this is kind of where we're at. And I wanted to just, give you an idea. We are at the stage, you see where the green X is, we're at the stage where we have developed a preliminary standard. Next slide. And I always get this question, okay, so if you guys are successful, how does the standard affect how to recycle? And the answer is they get to choose. You know, I can do all the wonderful work I can, but ultimately Green Blue and how to recycle are the ones that, you know, have to be able to be comfortable with the method. I do know that and I have actually quite a bit of interaction with how to recycle, but I do know that they're considering using the CEPI method as a valid way to a valid way to test. And I do know that there's been some frustration with how to recycle, in that they seem to want to continue to hold on to the WMU Western Michigan test as the test for recyclability. Moving on. And so that's why we're working on the project that I'm working on. The goal is to develop a consensus test method, and the idea is to have it set up so that it can be run with widely available equipment and at a lot of different locations. Next slide. And the last little bit is just a series of pictures kind of showing you what the test method looks like, and then we'll be done. So pulping is the usual, slurrying it up in water. Fine slotted screen. I realize this slide has a mistake in it. We're using 6,000 slots. And then you're making hand sheets, dyeing, meaning making the hydrophobic things turn blue, and then doing image analysis. And then the yield is calculated on knowing how much you put into the pulper, and then measuring how much mass you get in the hand sheets. So now we're going to just click through a series of pictures that show you what the various stages look like. So next slide. So for example, this is aimed at looking at packaging is the primary thing we're after, but other printed products could be done as well. So this is just an example of a set of boxes that a company wanted to know, do these pass the test? So next slide. And then we run it through, next slide, a shredder, and it becomes shredded material, next slide. And then this is the pulper that we're using. It's a standard British disintegrator. So the shreds that you just saw and water are added to this machine. It's closed up and it's run for a certain number of revolutions, 30,000 in this particular case. Next slide. And then it's run through a slotted screen. So what it is there's a slotted screen underneath there, and there's a vibrating diaphragm that's moving the water and pulp up and down. Next slide. And when it passes through the screen, it runs into what's called a screen box. And here's the pulp that's being at the end. And then next slide. And then these are the rejects. You can see the little slots on the edge there where there's slots, but these are the material. This is the material that didn't come through. And then the next slide. And then we make hand sheets out of the accepted pulp. Next slide. And then we dry those hand sheets, and then the next slide. And then we stain them with a dye. And this happens to not be exactly the sheets for the box. The P1 sheets there are ones that actually had adhesive in them. So if you had an adhesive material that came through the screen, the dye, the blue dye, helps us know where that is and picks it up. Next slide. So there's where we're at. Where packaging materials may include ink and brown fiber. We're working through that. We're also working on trying to standardize the tools for image analysis. And then that's the last slide. Next, well, I have some next steps. Next slide. So we have a draft review done. We've developed the standard materials, and we're now working with laboratories to conduct the round robin. The precision statement needs to be developed for this method. And then we're going to analyze and publish the results, hopefully by the first quarter of next year. So the last slide is my contact information. And I'm open for questions.
Excellent update, Carl. One question I have to get the questions rolling, and if you do have questions, please feel free, put those in the chat function, and I'll ask those of Carl. But Carl, can you when you had mentioned on your slide about the interferences in recycling, is that for the I guess the way I need to phrase this question is because I saw that we have some commercial printers, and I think we have some packaging printers. So more in the world of commercial printing, we're more accustomed with recycling that occurs with a de-inking step, as well as not just repulping. So when you were talking about those design principles, would those hold true if this was a de-inking as well as a repulping and then de-inking? Sorry, I was out of sequence.
Yeah, I think I understand your question. The question is, how much de-inking is actually done nowadays?
Right.
Because so when you're talking about de-inking, you're talking about flotation, using flotation to remove material. And the de-inking market actually came out of the old magazines and newsprint world. And they were usually headed back to some lightweight coated grade or something like that. There is really not, it's like, here's a case where the market is really has shifted pretty dramatically. I know I'm talking to a group of printers and you guys are still printing and having a nice business. But in terms of paper recycling, there is, it almost has turned into a niche market where people are recycling back to a printing and writing grade. Most of this mixed paper that I'm talking about is ending up in board grades and things like that. They're really, if somebody's trying to make a white printing and writing grade paper from recycled, and there still is a market because of some of the post-consumer content requirements. But if they're doing that, they're actually going out and looking for trimmings. They're looking for, cleaner sources, things that haven't ever touched a MRF is what they're after to use as their feedstock.
So what your focus is on trying to maximize the materials that are being recovered from MRFs in terms of getting that back into the loop, so to speak, to get it back into the system, right, to make. Okay. Yeah. All right. Excellent.
It is very unlikely that, most lightly printed, paper will actually pass this test that we're proposing, because it pulps up well. It usually doesn't have much to it. As long as you're not adding a lot of foil or something like that, that's going to stay as particles. Actually, under the test that we're working on, flexo printed materials are actually not called out as problematic, and the Europeans don't see it that way either. Although flexo gets pulled out in their test method in another place other than paper quality, it gets pulled out in what gets washed out of the fiber.
Oh, well, you know what? That leads me to another question in terms of, and it may not be as prevalent, but how about digitally printed packaging? There's, as you are probably aware, there's a shift towards the use of digital printing technologies versus conventional printing technologies. Have you seen any issues with digitally printed products?
Not in the test method that we're working on and developing. We really don't have anything in here about brightness or things dissolved. And, that was actually a shift from previous, in the sense that mills are used to dealing with all of those things now. When flexo first came out, what is it, 15 years ago now or so, it was causing some problem. There was a lot of recyclers out there saying, oh my God, what are you guys doing to us? But now there's so much digitally printed and so much flexo being printed out there that the recycling mills have come up with solutions for that.
Oh, excellent. Okay. That's great, because yeah, that was always one of the concerns with a water-based flexo printed product, is that it didn't de-ink very well, but there's no de-inking going on here, so it's just more repulping.
Right. And there's actually a fair bit of washing going on. You don't really think about it, but when we're making hand sheets, we're starting with a very dilute solution of fibers, and then we're drawing it down onto a screen. So there's a lot of material that gets washed out of that. So my guess is, we haven't really tested it carefully, but my guess is, a digitally printed, like a standard inkjet printed type paper would actually end up passing the test.
Interesting. Well, I know we're getting short on time, but there is one more question. Can you comment on adhesive products, and are there any that would be likely to pass the test?
Yeah, they're actually, so anything that's like a hard hot melt, so the typical kind of flap closure hot melts that you might use for a cardboard box or something, will pass. And there are several, so the TLMI test method for recycling compatible adhesives, the RCA test method, has been around for about 20 years. And there are all of the major adhesive suppliers out there. So I have to say I'm not endorsing any of these because I'm a government employee, but like 3M and Avery and Franklin and a bunch of the adhesive suppliers out there have materials that they have tested using the TLMI test method. So yes, and the starting point of this is the TLMI test method in the sense that we're using 6-cut screens. So if you go to an adhesive supplier and you want to have an adhesive that passes the test, they can give you pretty good guidance on what that would be.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Last question. When the method gets approved, when will we know, and how can we get a copy of it?
So the test method is actually going to be done through TAPI. So anybody that's a TAPI member will be able to get the notification immediately. The other thing is that once we get it approved, the rubber doesn't really hit the road until How to Recycle allows it as a test method for submitting a product for certification. And so you'll have to work, if you're using How to Recycle, they will know too as well. Okay. Or you can ask me.
Yeah, well, we're in fairly constant contact, but it's it would be everyone who might be attending the program to be able to, but they have your contact info, so they could occasionally email you, and you can always give them.
And I hope that actually when we get it released, I think it's going to be enough of a splash that there will be some coverage of it in the trade journals and such. Yeah. Because I do know that there still is a pain point for a lot of manufacturers around the issue of having to do the WMU test to get their material through How to Recycle.
Okay, yeah, and I suspect you're right. I think there'll be a big splash through the trade press as well. But all right, so we're a little bit over our cutoff time. Carl, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to be our speaker for this webinar. If anybody has any questions, Carl's contact information is in the slides. Also, if you feel comfortable, you can email me, and I can always forward the questions on to Carl. So I want to thank everyone for attending our program, and have a nice day.